Hey there, Refuge Church. Here we are again. We have week 9 in our series of the gospel and emotional well-being. I have not given birth yet, which is imminent. Hopefully not so imminent as to happen in this video. Fingers crossed. I'm going to pray and kick us off. God, I thank you that week after week we have been able to see your truths amidst all the narratives and all the things we tell ourselves and that have been told to us that get in the way of us being able to connect with you and walk with you in full flourishing and well-being. I pray that you would continue to do that work today, that you would turn our deserts into flourishing places, gardens and fountains and all the things that Isaiah prophesies. I pray that that would be the case on individual level and community level and corporate church level as well. And pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so our figure this week that we are looking at with the Enneagram to help us wrap our minds around these different narratives is the king, Shaul ben Kish. We've already had a Shaul, if you remember, going back to the very beginning. Paulus began his life with the name Shaul. So yes, it is definitely an intentional chiasm. But this is the character of King Saul, if you're not familiar. He has many, many chapters devoted to him in 1st and 2nd Samuel. So we are going to be looking at a specific portion of his life, the first part, in fact, and leave it there because there's just too much ground to cover otherwise. But fascinating. When we first meet this guy, Shaul, he is just your average Joe, and his father has called him or told him to go and find the donkeys. The donkeys have gotten loose, and he is to go figure out where they've gone. So he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. You'll often find 9s going along with what is expected of them. The servant that is with Shaul suggests, hey, maybe we should go talk to this seer, this prophet guy. Maybe he knows where our donkeys are. And Shaul says, yeah, sure, goes along with it. Again, hallmark of a 9. When he shows up to the prophet's house, the prophet Samuel or Shmuel is there, and it's very turning around in the spinny chair, petting the cat, because he says, aha, I knew, I've been expecting you. Dinner is prepared, and I have a place for you on my roof to sleep tonight. You are going to serve the Lord in these amazing ways. And Shaul says, this is his response in 1 Samuel 9, am I not a Benjamite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way? 1 Samuel 9 again. So he's kind of like the embodiment of the shrug emoji. Like, why are you talking to me about this, man? I don't know. I'm just here looking for my donkeys. But Shmuel communicates to him that actually he has been chosen by God to lead God's people, to be the first king after a long line of judges. And again, shrug emoji archetype here says, well, all right then. Shmuel tells him, don't worry about your donkeys. They've already been found. And so instead go and offer sacrifices. Go find the charismatics. They've been around always. They're not a new invention, but that's mostly a joke. Go and find God's people who are celebrating and prophesying and singing and dancing on the road, and join them and worship alongside them. And when you do, God's Spirit will fall upon you, and you will be ready to be king. Which is interesting. We could go into so much about the role of the Spirit there, and how the Spirit shows up in Tanakh as a whole. Super fascinating, but we don't have time for any of those side notes, so ask me about them later. So he does what he's supposed to, and sure enough, his family isn't worried about the donkeys. They're just worried about where he is. He gets anointed as king, and very famously, while everyone is there at the coronation party, thinking of imperial, lots of trumpets and festivities in our time. I'm sure we'll get to see that in a few weeks out of the UK. Imagine if they found Prince Charles, or King Charles now, I suppose, hiding in the storage. That's what Shaul does. He tries to hide and pretend that he's not there. He's very uncomfortable with all the attention that is being placed upon him, all the significance, and so he tries to make himself literally invisible. Unfortunately for him, it says that he is much taller than most of the people, so as soon as someone spots him and drags him out, everybody says, all hail the king. 1 Samuel 10:27 says that some worthless fellows, this is not my translation, by the way, I just think that what a way to be recorded throughout all of history. Some worthless fellows said, "How can this man save us?" And they despised him and brought him no presents. But Shaul held his peace. So there's a real strength of the 9, the peacemaker, the ability to say, you know what, it's fine. I don't need everybody to give me incredible amounts of tribute, even if that's what they're supposed to do societally. I'm just going to hold my peace. I'm going to keep the peace that way by not saying anything about it, and that's fine. That's a big strength, in fact, of the 9s, is that ability to grapple with their own ego and set their needs aside. Now that can be unhealthy, but we'll get to that later. However, next time we see him, Shaul, that is, Samuel 11, verse 5, he's gone back to the farm. It says, even though he's been anointed king and proclaimed king, and this whole thing has went down, he goes back to the farm and is helping the oxen plow. But he hears that a town in Israel has been invaded, and they're trying to surrender to the foreign people who have invaded them, and the oppressive force has said, we'll only let you surrender if you give us your eyeballs, which is pretty dark in Game of Thrones, but that's where we're at. And Shaul is so angry at this. 9s are actually part of the anger triad, that this is the thing, like you don't have to give me tribute, you can say who's this guy, whatever, but you're gonna do something this unjust and this amount of violence? Absolutely not on my watch. And he kills the oxen and cuts it into pieces, which is gross, but he sends it out and rallies the people to himself and says, I'm going to do the same to you like I did to this oxen if you don't show up. 9s have a big sense of right and wrong. They're right next to that 1, so often they have the 1 wing. If you don't know Enneagram, it's okay. Just they have an idealistic justice sense of values that can lead them to anger. So he leads them into the battle. Everything goes swimmingly. He kicks out the eyeball stealers, which honestly, what are you going to do with all those eyeballs? And Shaul, then afterwards, during the celebration, the question is asked to him, should we punish those who doubted you? And in chapter 11, he says, not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath worked salvation in Israel. There's a big party instead. So again, 9's given the choice between, like, should you punish the people who are doing wrong and kick them out? Nope. No, it's fine. We're here now. We're going to focus on what's good. Another great strength of the 9's. So the story goes on to talk about how he continues to have all these military successes, but soon enough, 36,000 Philistine, so these Greek people who've showed up on shore, they're gathered for a battle, and Shmuel, the prophet, is supposed to be there to bless the proceedings and help Shaul lead his people against this massive army. But in very Gandalf style, Shmuel does not show up. And Shaul waits 7 days, and his people start hiding in, quote, caves, holes, rocks, cisterns, and graves. It's not a great list of places to hide, but that's where they went. And those who stayed with Shaul are still terrified. So we see not really stepping into his leadership here. Shaul, again, when it comes to deference, he's doing great. When it comes to keeping the peace, he's doing great. When it comes to how does he step into his power and authority and rally the people, even when his Merlin figure, Shmuel, hasn't showed up, he doesn't do great. So what he does is outside of Levitical code. He responds by offering up a sacrifice himself. So he doesn't assert himself to the people. He doesn't say, hey, get out of your cisterns, get out of the grave you're hiding in, that's gross, come on, we've got this. Instead, he offers a sacrifice. So he's afraid of the people abandoning him, and he's willing to do things that even push the boundaries of what he knows is right in order to accommodate others and not lose them. So he does this. They have their battle with the Amalekites, rather. And God has told them that the Amalekites are supposed to be pushed out of the land entirely. All of them. Nothing is to remain. And instead, God's people under Shaul take their stuff. They do some looting. And God is not a fan of looting. He's a fan of taking the possessions of the people. Like defensive action is one thing. Stealing stuff and saying, ha ha ha, military conquest is another. So when Shmuel shows up to confront Shaul, too many shas, it doesn't go over well because he hasn't stepped into his power as king. He accommodated the people and let them do all this stuff that God told them not to. And he did this thing by making a sacrifice that he wasn't supposed to make. And so this is what he says. Shmuel came to Shaul, and Shaul said to him, blessed be you to the Lord. I performed the commandment of the Lord. Shmuel says, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? So Shaul's like, I did the thing, we fought the battle, we won, everything's great, yay. And Sam says, then how come I hear all this plunder talking? Because livestock back then is financial. And then Shaul, so the king says, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep. So they didn't take everything, they just took the best ones. The best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we devoted to destruction. So this is not true. It does not say that the people took the animals in order, and only the best ones, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God. By the way, he kind of does some blame shifting there. Like, look, it's your God who said this, and we're just trying to serve him well. He's being a peacemaker in a negative way. He's not talking about what is true. He's not owning either his leadership or the failings of his people. He's just saying, I'm sure it's for sacrifices. Shmuel said to Shaul, so Merlin says to the king, stop. I will tell you what the Lord said to me this night, which is always a bad sign if God's gone and told all your secrets to his prophet. Shaul the king said to Samuel, speak. Shmuel said, though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. So nines can get into this victim territory of like, look, it's just what everybody wanted, and what was I supposed to do? Samuel says, God made you king. You're the one who is supposed to be leading this people, and therefore you have the ability to control, or at least to express your authority to keep them from doing what God has told them not to do. Come on. It's not acceptable just because you see yourself as being small to underestimate the responsibility that God has placed in you and over you for your life. And because of this, and the sacrifice issue, Samuel has to go and do some beheading, which is pretty intense. But also the dynasty, the legacy of Shaul will end up being taken away from him, from his ability to be king. He's abdicated his responsibility. And so God says, well, okay, then I guess that's not, I guess your lineage is not going to be the one that reigns forever. And that begins this whole thing between David and Shaul, which is a totally different story. But you, listener, might be a 9 if, as a child, you might have felt lost or unimportant in a group. You might have been a middle kid, might have been lots of kids, where your opinions weren't heard. As a child, you may have felt overlooked, neglected, or overpowered. And you may have felt ignored or attacked for having needs or expressing yourself. Of course, this can apply all across all the different types of narratives and childhood experiences, but it's especially true if you were a 9. Because of this, the 9 learned to keep a low profile, to focus on the needs and experiences of others, to be easygoing and accommodating, and to detach from the physical world in favor of a dream world, right? So while the 5s escape into competency, the 7s escape somewhere totally different by just pretending to be fine. The 8s escape by being strong enough to deal with whatever. The 9s escape into this dream world where everything's fine. I'm sure the animals are just for sacrifices. I don't have any needs. Everything's good. That's the go-to. However, these learned behaviors are coping mechanisms so that, one, we can feel connected to others by accommodating their needs, right? So if you feel disconnected and unseen and overlooked and neglected, one way to try to feel connection is by getting people to like you by saying okay to everything they say, right? That's a nice moment. Someone says, hey, you should give me your lunch. Rather than having a fight with the bully, you can just say, yeah, sure, totally, man. Feels better than being beat up, right? All of these coping mechanisms were developed because we needed to. And so we want to have compassion and understanding and empathy and curiosity rather than eye rolling. Okay, these learned behaviors are also coping mechanisms so that the 9 can feel in control by erasing their needs and emotions from the equation in order to maintain peace and balance. So if they grew up in a chaotic home, lots of kids, middle kids, lots of stuff going on, one way to feel more in control is to decide that you don't need anything. I'm good. You've just eliminated a major source of chaos, right? And so these are the strategies the 9s have developed. Great things about 9s. God created all of us to work toward peace and coexist in harmony. Their seeking after peace is good. It is not weak. It is not unbiblical or ungodlike. Ephesians talks about all diversity living together, coexisting without boundary walls, and 9s really are good at spotting those boundary walls and working out, they're taking them away. God created us to desire connection. All humans desire connection, including 9s. God created us to include others. 9s often feel safe to people because they are inclusive and they want things to stay on the level, and that's wonderful. God created us all to make space for everyone to be heard. That goes with inclusion, right? Then God created us to build unity in the midst of diversity, right? So it's not that we stamp out diversity. It's not that diversity is bad. Diversity is baked into creation itself, right? We're created in all of our different kinds, and that is good. And we are invited to be one body of Christ, right? In Ephesians, and other places, that's the model. We're all different and yet we all can come together to put the world back together, right? And so that's beautiful. And 9s help they're the glue that can keep us going, right? Especially through their model of self-sacrifice, which is great until it's not, right? So the emotional experiences that 9s might have, we're going to talk about invisibility versus connection. So the temptation of the 9 is to sink themselves, as happened in their childhood, right? So it's not all their fault, but to sink themselves into invisibility. And all this Brene's work, where Dr. Brene Brown says, invisibility is a function of disconnection and dehumanization, where an individual or group's humanity and relevance are unacknowledged, ignored, and or diminished in value or importance. So the 9 does this to themselves all the time. The church can do this to 9s because they're people who'll show up and say, oh yeah, totally, I'll do that. Just like 2s, they can be taken advantage of. And so that's important to be aware of. But it's a way to fit in and a way to keep the peace and keep everybody together if you just decide, I don't have any needs. But what that leads to is, rather than connection, disconnection and feeling invisible, which is an intensely painful experience that will be difficult to mute, even if you're pretty dang good at muting your emotions. On the other side of invisibility is connection. Connection is the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and where they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. So 9s, you cannot experience connection if you do not let yourself be seen or heard or valued, right? So if you're the person in a small group who just kind of sits there and thinks, oh, I'm sure somebody else will say this, or they'll say it better, or nobody really needs my opinion, what you're doing is you're robbing yourself of connection. You're keeping yourself from experiencing being known, which is part of being human, part of the reason you're on the planet. You're not allowing yourself to be known, and you are missing out, and we are all missing out on you. So please stop. So what are the keys for dealing with this default to invisibility, this default to, my voice doesn't really matter. They'll figure it out. It'll be okay. I'll just peacemak. It's fine. How do we cultivate meaningful connection? So Dr. Brene Brown, her book, Atlas of the Heart, has like 25 of these things listed out. I pulled out 4 that felt really pertinent for the 9s, but just go buy her book, buy all of the books that I've been using this whole time. Again, the credits are in the description of this video. Okay, so how do we cultivate meaningful connection rather than invisibility and disconnection? Number 1, we can cultivate meaningful connection by practicing courage to own our own hurt, pain, and fear. So rather than saying everything's fine or choosing what she calls the armor of comfort, right? I don't need anybody, and I don't have to express myself if I just bury myself in food and media and my phone and whatever else. I'll be fine. We have to have the courage to be able to say how we're feeling, and what we are excited about, what we're joyful about, as well as the places that we have pain, if we're going to be truly known, if we're going to experience connection. So that's the first one. 1, practice courage to own hurt, pain, and fear. Number 2, key for cultivating meaningful connection, to rumble with your own vulnerability. This is connected to the last one, rather than performing vulnerability. If you grew up in the church space, especially the evangelical church space, some of us have gotten really good at performing vulnerability. We go through the motions of saying what sins we did or where we need Jesus, and it's a whole thing. That's not true vulnerability. That's what I just said, going through the motions, giving people what they want so that we won't particularly be noticed. So rumbling with vulnerability means choosing to acknowledge it to ourselves and to others rather than avoiding it, shutting it down, or acting out in blame and redirection, right? So a classic example of how this might look is one spouse might say to the other, how come you never help out around here? This room is a blah, blah, blah. And the other spouse might avoid the vulnerability. The true answer might be, depression, or not valuing oneself in the space that they live in. But rather than owning that and owning that responsibility and meeting that in that moment, shutting down and saying, it's fine, what are you talking about? Avoiding it, saying you're the one who has such a problem with it. Like if it bothers you, you should clean it up. That's blame. And hey, why are you even talking to me about this? Blah, blah, blah. That's redirection, right? Those are all things that we'd rather do than have real conversations about how we're doing and how the effects come out in our life. Number 3, how do we cultivate meaningful connection? Stay curious about our own feelings and those of others by exploring and contributing, rather than challenging and criticizing or showing indifference, disinterest, or defensiveness. So all of those things are pretty devastating if someone's trying to share with you about their feelings. And as a 9, sharing with you the 9. And if you are uninterested, defensive, or indifferent, you're communicating to the other person that they don't matter, right? And also, if we just respond by challenging, giving an easy answer, criticizing, that's also pretty devastating to be on the other side of. And maybe that's the way that 9s are people who feel the pressure to be invisible, deal with their own emotions, right? Like, stop it, go away. But that's not how we connect with others. That's not how we cultivate meaningful connection with others. Instead, we need to stay curious about both ourselves, but that other person. That looks like asking questions, exploring, contributing, as Brene says. Number 4, the last one here. Key to cultivate meaningful connection: commit to be others focused. This might sound like, well, the 9s are really good at being others focused. Wrong. I mean, not a whole blanket statement of wrong. Philippians calls us to count others more significant than ourselves. And 9s, yes, can excel in taking note of the needs of others and how others are doing. However, the 9 is worried about trying to cultivate that peace, that sense of security, that stability, that zen, which was stolen from them in childhood. And so committing to be others focused is about leaving that dream world that again gets built up through practices of comfort and self-soothing, right? And instead, again, through the things that we've talked about, maintaining curiosity about the other people, practicing courage to own things, rumbling with our own vulnerability, etc. That's what it looks like to be others focused, not solving the problem so that we can go back. We don't want to perform concern while trying to maintain control and distance, or defaulting to self-protection and self-focus, right? So it can be tempting for the 9s or for any of us to go through the motions of being concerned about whatever someone's telling us about, while still wanting to maintain that distance, while still wanting to have the easy answer, while still redirecting to thinking about yourself. Yep, that sucks. Gonna go back to my phone now, right? That is not, that's not a Christ-like model that we want to emulate and follow after, seek after. So those are our keys for dealing with invisibility. Practice courage, rumble with vulnerability, stay curious, and commit to be others focused. Challenge that's good for all of us. So what is the gospel for our 9s? And for any of us who wrestle with these patterns? There's these different lies that we are going to go through one at a time. So lie number one, keeping the peace by avoiding conflict is more important than I am. 9s often have this deep fear of conflict, right? Shaul was not going to talk to his people about deserting the army and running away. He was not going to talk to them about their looting. He was going to keep the peace and I'll do the sacrifice myself so I don't have to bring this up with anybody. Hopefully it'll all sort itself out. Samuel will be proud of me. Fingers crossed. Let's see what happens. Classic 9 move. So the truth is that authentic peace and shalom, which is the peace of completeness and flourishing, is only possible on the other side of truth and clarity. So if someone is suffering or something wrong is happening, like people's being looted, that is not true peace. You're going da ba da na. That's not authentic peace. That is not kingdom peace. That's not the peace that God has called us toward. God calls us to make good trouble, as the civil rights leader and Senator John Lewis told us before his death, God will be with you in the midst of the conflict, just as he will be with you in the midst of the peace, in the midst of the Zen that you're seeking after, right? Some of us absolutely do not need this lesson and like to stir up trouble and like to say weird things and just see what happens for a lot of reasons, which are not healthy. This one is not for you, but that mute your earbuds for just a minute. But God will be with you, nines, as you are strong to say what is right and true and important and valuable with your important God-made voice, even as he's with you in your oasis that you have constructed inside your mind. All right, lie number 2. My wants, needs, and presents don't really matter. So just reality check here. Jesus's wants and needs mattered, right? He needed to sleep. He demanded to be alone. He went to parties. And he was the greatest peacemaker of all time, right? He said to hordes of people showing up who needed healing, right? It's pretty straightforward need there. Nobody's lying about their broken leg. And he said, nope, my needs, which are to sleep or to be alone or to pray, are more important than whatever is pressing ahead of me. So if Jesus got to do that as the greatest peacemaker of all time, certainly you do. The lie, by the way, that my present wants and needs don't matter is more of a shield for what we're really worried about, which is that if I express them, people will be upset and abandon me, right? We'll get to that in a minute. But the saying, oh, I'm fine and I don't have those, again, cuts off our ability to experience meaningful connection. So what's the point in being surrounded by a bunch of people if you don't have meaningful connection with any of them? Yes, I quoted Philippians saying, count others more significant than yourselves. But the prophets and other texts in the Bible encourage us to see God as our betrothed, who has poured out infinite time and love and care and suffering and intention into making you who you are and providing for you. And so who gives you the right to diminish that value that God has stated over you, right? Line number 3, nobody sees me or understands me because I'm not important. So first off, if that was true, which it probably isn't, that nobody really sees you or understands you, you're probably not that special. Even if that was true, that would be partially, at least, because you have failed to communicate your presence, wants, or needs, right? So it's the self-fulfilling prophecy of, I don't matter, and I see that because other people don't see me as mattering, and so we act out of that, and it continues and continues and continues, right? So stop the pattern. God's full truth is that God sees you, and out of that place, that God understands you, even better than you understand yourself. You are invited to make yourself seen, and that's not selfish, that is not bad, that is just part of being human. He gave you a voice, and God gave you callings and talents and abilities and gifts, and do not rob your community by presuming that nobody understands you or sees you and that you're not important enough. We need all the hands at the work of putting the world back together, and we need all the voices at the table. Again, earplugs people who don't struggle with this. Some of us fully believe that our voice is the most important at the table. But 9s, please know that God gave you your voice, and thus it is your prerogative to use it and your responsibility to use your power and gifts and calling and authority that you are given. And if you do not, you're abdicating from the responsibility given to you, like Shaul, and that did not turn out well for him. Number 4, last lie. People will abandon me if I self-advocate, and I will be alone. So this is at the bottom of the stack. This is the fear that drives all the other ones. I can't have needs, wants, or presents, because if I do, what if people leave, right? I have to keep the peace and I have to avoid conflict because I don't want to be alone. I have to continue to imagine myself unimportant, because if I imagine myself to be important, what if people left? So the truth is, you don't want the people around who only stick around because you're silent. That is not community, that is not friendship, that is not relationship, that is not connection. That is just manipulative and of them, and potentially an abusive situation, right? So yes, there is a possibility that if you start using and valuing your own voice, that people will be taken aback. People don't usually enjoy when you set up boundaries. It does not usually go super well. But it is much worse to live in a lifetime of silence and invisibility, surrounded by people who want that, than it is to start to step into who you are and lose a few people along the way, right? Because most of your community, hopefully, Lord willing, is not terrible and awful and manipulative and bad. Most people probably love you and want to know you more and want to know your presence and value your voice already. Because most people don't have the time and energy to be malicious, right? And so even if catastrophically you find yourself totally alone, totally betrayed, abandoned by everyone, even though that's unlikely, the gospel truth is that God can still be enough for you, can still be your portion, your abundance, your strength, your joy. All of these things in God's infinite being are there for you, so that you never have to be alone. Most of us will never need come into a place in our life. Well, some of us will actually, but many of us don't really ever hit the place where we experience God as being the only one that is there for us. But those of us who have been there and been out the other side have found that He is faithful and He's good and He is trustworthy, and He delights to provide for us and continues to do so always until the end of the age, right? Matthew 28. So we are invited, even if we're not nines, even if we haven't just lost everyone who's ever cared for us or seen us or loved us. We all are invited and challenged to find God to be that for ourselves, even now, to be our portion, to be our enough, to be sufficient for us, so that we can set down all these lies that have gotten in the way. So I am going to pray toward that and set us free. Lord God, I ask that you would do this work, that you would help us to see that we have been made intrinsically, importantly, and complexly, diversely, and we have been made imbued with you in your image in all these different beautiful ways. I ask that you would help us to see that and to love that and to own that and to step into that, and that there wouldn't be these different burdens and narratives and thoughts that hinder us from being able to be who you see us to be in this world. People who are full of joy, people who are full of passion, people who are full of peace, people who are full of satisfaction in you, Lord, who know that they are enough, who know that they are loved, who know that there's nothing else they need to do to earn your love. And so I pray that you would transform us into that image. You said that you foreknew us and you predestined us to be conformed to the image of your Son. And so I pray that your will would be done, that you would continue the work that you have promised to be faithful to, even when we are unfaithful. I thank you for that. I thank you for who you are. And I ask that all of these things might be done in the name of Jesus by the work and power of the Spirit. I ask all these things in your name. Amen. Okay. Again, if you've never given before, refugepullman.com has your hookups. Again, we are trying to get our technology to be a little bit better as we still bring in people as my upcoming maternity leave is on the horizon. We'd love to see you in our group. Even if you've never shown up before, fill out a form on refugepullman.com and we'd love to meet you. We'd love to hang out, love to get to know you and talk about all this together. Have a great week, you guys. Bye.